let's look at legs. I was actually doing, this was on my other client live stream that we just did. Now we happen to be asking about legs, which is what we're going to talk about. So we'll do it from here. Okay, so with the legs, now anything that we want to draw, if we want to give it life, we want our drawings to come alive, we want to draw just very simply the long axis as a curve. The longest possible axis as a curve. And we want that to either be symmetrical curves, and this is true whether we're drawing in line or, whoops, that's not very helpful, is it? Whether we're drawing in line or rendering in tone. So notice when I draw this core shadow and I do this painterly gradation, I'm showing you in a painterly way, in an imperfect way, how to move over the form. And that, in terms of one of the simplest ways to think of three-dimensional form, is simply getting the viewer's eyes to move over the form. Not just around the form, but one way or another over the form. And that means breaking the contour. So notice I could draw this box like this, but we'll just feel the silhouette, the shadow on the wall, as we're feeling here, until I break the form, break the contour, I should say, with line and or tone. You're not going to get the idea of form, and you certainly won't get the illusion of form. So now I'm showing the audience, how to move over the architecture. Over the architecture, as opposed to just moving around the form. And then if we draw the long axis of whatever we're drawing, not stiff and straight, but curved, or S-curved, we're not going to feel the life energy, the watery design, all of life, all of organic form. Well, organic life, I should say, not all organic form. It's going to be mainly water. And so if we don't have that long axis curve, we're not getting that watery design. And then things start to feel nice and solid, but fairly lifeless. So we need to at least get a little bit of curvature. And that includes probably the subtle curvature of the contour. Notice the watery curve of the contour and the watery curve of the shadow shape. And it can get stiff and straight sometimes, but then it's going to go back to its curved and S-curved roots because it's water, fluid, dynamic, alive. So curves along the long axis, we can curve, it's what a gradation is on form, is it's showing us how we curve over the form. A contour is showing us how we curve along the subtle forms of it. But we want the fundamental design, if at all possible, to be curved. And that means we can't have it stiff and straight in the long axis. We can't have it bulging or binding like an hourglass, because those are all stiff and straight and they have plenty of architecture potentially, but they're lifeless. So we want to feel this fluid design all the way down through that in line and tone. And the way we do that is through asymmetry. Either the form justifies ever more greatly to the left, or it does it to the right, and it can do it from the top, or it can do it from the bottom, and it can do it two-dimensionally, or it can do it three-dimensionally, and again in both line and tone. But until we get that asymmetry, we're not going to feel the curve, the wave action, because a wave is constantly asymmetrical. It's traveling in a straight line, but it's asymmetrical. And as it over-adjusts above, then it's got to over-adjust below. And the less perfect this is, a wave action in the laboratory or in the water, are perfect waves. It might be perfectly diminishing as it quiets, but they're perfect. We want imperfection if we want to show life, and not just pure water, but organic life that has shape. This has no shape. It just has a container that gives it shape. So we want it to be imperfect as well. But I want that asymmetry. And so it's going to curve, and any curve is asymmetrical. It's constantly changing directions, and then it may justify back with an S-curve or a compound curve, and that might reconstruct the symmetry, but it is asymmetrical by its nature. And then we can make the curvature itself of one side of that form asymmetrical to the other side. This side curves a lot. This side curves very little. This side actually S-curves. This side is stiff and straight. And so the more asymmetry you can bring into it, the more dynamic and oftentimes alive it is. And when we're doing the limbs, they're asymmetrical by nature. What is on the left is not on the right. What is on the top is not on the bottom. They're dynamically different. And that's what gives it interest. If we look at a torso, it's relatively symmetrical until that torso, that body, moves into an asymmetrical position. But it's symmetrical. But the limbs are not. They are symmetrical with the other limb on the opposing side. This is both called bilateral symmetry. But the limbs themselves, what is on the inside is seldom the same as on the outside. What is on the top is seldom the same as what's on the bottom. All good here, not seeing you. Yeah, you won't, Katina, you won't see me, but you should see my pencil drawing the marks. So anyway, that's going to be the game, is making it this leg symmetrical with maybe the other leg, or roughly so. But from this side to this side, and this side to this side, we want to make it slightly asymmetrical. And so typically with the legs, we're going to find, let's do a profile here, male or female. And if we make the hips a little bit bigger and slightly square, oftentimes that's suggestive of the female. A little more simple egg and slightly smaller in proportions. A little bit more male, but the construction is the same. And you're going to tend to see something rather curved, not every time, but most of the time on the front, and fairly straight, or just a little straighter, less curved on the back. And then you may well, especially a muscular character like a sprinter or something, male or female, gymnast, that kind of thing, you can see the bulge of the hamstring there. But what I'm looking for is the longest sustained curve, not the subtle wobbles, but the simplification of that. If there's a big change, then I'm going to stop the curve and then begin another curve. But if it's generally at a glance feeling like it's all moving together, then it can be a curve or an S curve. And if I see some short, really bulbous form, I'm going to make this bloated. I'll usually cut off that short bloat and I'll add those on as lesser secondary structures. Let's sit in here somehow or another. And what we'll find on the front side is, in fact, all the forms, we'll find that if they're going in generally the same direction, they'll connect on a curve or an S curve. If they're going in distinctly different directions, they'll connect on a corner. And in the beginning, I consider the curve that I'm drawing far more important than the shape I'm drawing. Or sometimes even drawing a shape or a structure at all. Sometimes I'll just make it a gesture and then save the constructions two-dimensionally or three-dimensionally for other areas. So the gesture is kind of the spirit of it, the energy, and so the action, the lifeline. And it's fundamentally more important than the structure and such. And so I'm looking for that first, and then I'll build the structure on it as we talked about. And I'll bump things together or overlap things to show a hierarchy of form, something in front of something else, and so on. And a great exercise is to draw out of your head, unless you just hate it. I was just working with somebody a few days ago, I forget who it was, who just does not like working out of her head. Then don't do it. Find something that's funner. Work from reference, work from life, work from a mirror. And notice the upper leg and the lower leg gets skinnier and skinnier and skinnier. So it goes down, tapers in. So it's asymmetrical from top to bottom. It's not an equal curve usually. It's usually an asymmetrical curve, whether we're doing a front view or a back view. But it tends to be asymmetrical. Oftentimes the outside's more bulging, the front side's more bulging on the leg. And this is going to be true whether we draw it in line or tone generally. So generally, if we have a very round form, we're probably going to get a very round shadow, very curved shadow on it. And if we make a soft edge between the light and the shadow, it sets us up for that rendering beautifully, technically perfect or painterly or whatever. And usually if the forms don't radically separate, then the shadows will tend to not radically separate. There'll be just a little bump. Or a little wobble. Let's just do this, excellent. And if you can just learn to draw these things in soft edges, if that calf dramatically separates from that hamstring, let's say, and you might get the shadow shapes dramatically separating. And if we can make this transition between shadow to light soft edge, then it's easy to render that soft edge into a full gradation as it rounds over back into full light, or if it drops off out of full light. And so the rendering is fairly straightforward that way. And so what I'll do is I'll practice drawing these things out of my head. And then when I get stumped, how does the shin and calf fit into the thigh through that knee area? What's going on there? How do we make that transition there? Which muscle is overlapping which? And which is underlapping? And so I'll spend a lot of time, not a ton of time, but I'll put some percentage of my practice towards trying to understand these things on a simple level. Just simple shapes with simple shadow shapes. And if I get a bumpy shadow, I'm probably getting a bumpy contour. And the more things separate, the more violently the shadows separate. And the more things group, the more subtly they separate, or more completely they group. And then little forms are just little bumps in the contour. And that includes the contour of the shadow oftentimes. And generally, if I make the cast shadow edge where the shadow shape ends before light begins again, or before background begins again, then at that point, I'll usually draw a sharp edge. It can be soft, but for kind of a shorthand, I'll make it a soft edge where that knee structure is interrupted by the kneecap, where that calf structure is interrupted by the bone of the calf, the bone of the shin, and I'm actually drawing the inside of a calf in terms of shin. This is right for the outside. The other side of the hip and the other leg were here. This is more of an inside here, but just to show you. So a soft edge as we make that beautiful transition out of light into shadow because of the character, the shape of the form itself. And hard edge where shadow abruptly ends and light takes over, or light abruptly ends as a shadowy form blocks it, like an egg on a table. So that's the foundation of it. And we can do all the different positions. But one of the things that's fun to do and super productive to do, I spent my whole career doing this, and I do it all the time when I teach people, because it's a great way for them to learn, and I get to practice on them. But if you want to really master something, immerse yourself in it. Do it over and over again. And so draw out of your head or draw from reference. And then I'm going to do a pretty quick sketch. Of the construction with a simple shading technique. Maybe making those base of the shadows a little hard edged. The beginning of the next shadow a soft edge. Sometimes zigzagging these forms as they break violently away from each other. Sometimes blending these forms as they flow rather smoothly into each other. And then I'm going to take this and I'm going to do it again. And maybe I'll work on the position. Maybe it was laying down too much. It needs to sit up. Or the proportions. Maybe it needs to sit up. But start higher and tighter off the hip. Maybe it needs to not taper that much. Maybe when the shadow shape comes, it swells down kind of slopes down to that knee connection. And I'll iterate these kind of things several times, just dealing with one or two ideas until I get something that's a little or a lot better. And that way, in just a few minutes, I can make real progress. And then I'm going to want to repeat that over the next several sessions, over the rest of my career, to make sure I remember it and refine my thinking. Actually, I want it to zigzag this way. And I want this to bulge to show that quadriceps structure here. And also suggest the hamstring structure here. And I might iterate it again. And just make this a bulge that falls and almost completely disappears as it turns into a little S-curve, but it's a different S-curve than this S-curve. And I'll work that out over just a few drawings, 2 or 3, 8 or 10, whatever it is. And now I've got something with just a little bit of practice, got significantly better. And then I can keep working on it or come back next time. Well, I want a little overlap here. I want a little chiseled corner here. I want highlights to tend to catch on that corner there, and so on. And I can then iterate where the highlight goes, how chiseled that corner is. Maybe it should be a rounder corner. Maybe it should be a swollen corner. Maybe it should drop off and chisel at the bottom. Maybe it should be sharp and rounded at the top. And sharp at the top, rounded at the bottom. And so on. And pick out those possibilities there. So, paying attention. What do I see? Or what do I imagine? And then when my imagination fails me, as it will, then I go back to source material. And I find models, even if it's me in a bathroom mirror, to check out what's going on there. Something wrong with that thigh. I could just feel down my own leg and realize, wouldn't even have to take my pants off, and realize that here it all blends together. That calf is actually coming over. It's not stepping back away from that knee structure. It's building over that. So that's very different than an inside view or front view where we're seeing the calf here blending into the shin bone. I can feel it on my own leg if I check. And the calf here hiding behind. So this looks like an inside view, like I'm looking here. I need to change that. I had to go to reference to figure that out and correct it. And sometimes if you draw the natural character of things, which is oftentimes teardrops, something thicker going into something thinner, like the muscle forms here, and so on. If you understand the character, even if you do kind of blunder it, blow it, or hyper-stylize it, it'll still ring true because it's the shape design of nature, of the muscles of the human body, and so on. So I think we'll stop there, my friends.